Oh, Mark Davis has got me going on this homeschooling, y'all. More reasons why he's wrong, and I couldn't get to on the air. You know, I think people that want more regulation of the market should have to prove first that it's necessary, and really that's unprovable, because what's wrong to somebody is okay with somebody else. So you can never prove that it's necessary unless you arbitrarily co-opt the free will of a certain group of individuals. But they should at least be required to prove that their proposals. So we have 225 years of history in America, and going back further than that in the colonies of how anything works. For example, we have 225 years of history of how free markets in education work. We have 225 years of history in how free markets in grain work, and in how it works in healthcare, and in retirement planning, and in every single issue there's 225 years here in this country, and there's an infinite amount of history of the world almost. And then, you know, you can go back further than 225 years here in America as colonies. So we have quite a bit of history to look at to see if similar proposals have succeeded in the past. And the burden of proof should be upon the regulators to prove that their regulation works. The burden of proof is not upon free individuals. You don't have to prove anything to be left free. The regulators should have to prove. So, what is the state's record in education regulation? It's abysmal. What is a public school more than super regulated homeschooling? What more is it? A public school is simply something that the state dreamed up that came from homeschooling. I mean, think about it. When there were no public schools, and yes, there has been a time when that was the case, unbelievable as it may seem, when there were no public schools, it was only homeschools and private schools. So public education is just education extremely regulated by the state. And how's that working out? You can't pick up a paper without seeing, one, either corruption by high-level school officials, or two, something about the performance of our public education system and its lack of ability to put out individuals qualified for the workforce or for college. So they don't have a good record of regulating education. And the further we go towards that direction, the less successful our education has been. The second thing is, Mark Davis says if one person got through that was totally screwed up by their education, he would just felt wrong for not having a system in place. Well, if that's the case, I mean, Mark is a good-hearted individual, I guess. But if that's the case, and he wants to save some people that are being screwed up by their education, I would suggest the first place to start would be in the public education system. Talking about being screwed up by your education experience, I'd like to compare two things in education systems. First, I'd like to compare the rate of incident of teachers being sexually molested. I'd like to compare the rate of incident of students being sexually molested by their teachers for homeschooling students and for public school students. as a percentage, do you think more public school children have been molested or raped by their teachers, or more homeschool students? I guarantee you that rate is higher at the public schools. And second of all, I want to talk about children that are killed by weapons, by gunfire, by another student. What do you think the rate of incident is amongst public education students who are killed by other students compared to that same scenario for homeschoolers? What do you think the incident rate is of students attending schools where weapons are present in the public system versus the homeschool system? Okay, and now we haven't even started to talk about the education aspects of it, okay? You see what I'm saying? Private and homeschools do not have these problems. You don't see people going into private schools and blowing the place up. You don't see them coming to homeschool class and doing these things. So just out of the safety of a human being, homeschool is much more effective and better. And the education is not even close. Homeschoolers now are being heavily recruited by Harvard and other Ivy League schools. Their SAT scores are through the roof. And there's a whole bunch of to-do in the public schools about the steady decline of the same. So you can, the research data is not real clear, and opponents of homeschooling want to say that those children already have certain advantages over those in the public school system in general. And that may be true. But you can't argue that for whatever the reason, the homeschoolers are doing fine. They may be smart to start with, but they're doing fine. They're winding up in colleges at 98% levels. They're winding up, high SAT scores. They're doing fine. Even if they're smarter to start with, the homeschools aren't screwing them up. They're doing fine. If we want to start saving children that are being screwed up by their education experience, we need to start in the public schools. Mark, in the public schools. All that stuff I just mentioned goes on more in public schools. Much less the education that they receive. 60-something%, 40% dropout. I mean, it's ridiculous. Start in the public schools. You want to say the homeschoolers? 99% of them are doing just fine. Let's get in there in the public education system and see what's going on there. This all stems down to a problem I call the perfect is the enemy of the good. I mean, you can have a thing that's so great, it could be the greatest thing in the world. Capitalism is the perfect example. But if a few people get corrupt in capitalism, people want to come in and shut the whole thing down because of a couple of corrupt people. Because 15% of America doesn't have health care. They want to screw up the system for 100%. Life is not perfect. You cannot stop human suffering. You cannot stop screw-ups. You cannot stop people from going out, doing some crazy things every once in a while, doing immoral things. You can't do that. But if the government doesn't have the power to prosecute that, how are they going to have the power to do the thing actually themselves if they can't prosecute the wrongs that occur in the doing of it to start with? The free market has delivered goods and services very well for thousands of years now, and it's not perfect, but it's better than any other system that anybody's ever come up with, and we want to do away with it because of a few failures or a few crazy people here and there. The perfect is the enemy of the good.